So let's just dive right into this explainer by looking at how this absolutely chilling opening line hooks you immediately, while perfectly establishing our focus today on the craft of storytelling. Right from the jump, we're given a promise. We aren't just getting a generic, spooky campfire tale here, we are being handed a profound psychological mystery. I mean, think about it. This single sentence does so much heavy lifting. It sets a scene, it introduces an immediate physical threat with a body on the road, and then it instantly pivots to a lingering psychological intrusion by suggesting that this terror has actually followed the narrator home. It's literally a masterclass in establishing stakes before the story has even truly begun.
Welcome to today's explainer. We are going to break down the sheer mechanics of narrative tension, pacing, and sensory horror using this gripping fictional story as our case study. Whether you're a writer yourself, a massive fan of the thriller genre, or just someone fascinated by how words on a page can make your heart race, you're going to get a lot out of this. We'll be looking at exactly how authors manipulate our expectations, stretch our perception of time, and use highly specific details to bypass our logical brains and tap directly into our primal fears.
Section 1. Grounding the Mundane World.
To build effective terror, you first have to build reality. This brilliantly illustrates the stark contrast between the protagonist's boring family gas delivery business and the eerie setting he's forced to navigate. I mean, we start with a 19-year-old kid who just wants to check WhatsApp stories and avoid his aunt's slightly burnt rice while driving a beat-up 90s Ford. It is incredibly, almost painfully normal, and that's the point. By heavily emphasizing this mundane reality, the author lulls us into a false sense of security. It makes the desolate ghost towns and rumors of dangerous drifters feel that much more alien and threatening when they inevitably crash into his ordinary life.
Moving on to Section 2, the art of foreshadowing.
Notice how the author cleverly uses family dialogue at a warm birthday party to plant little seeds of doubt. We're actually looking at 3 distinct layers of foreshadowing here. First, you have the practical, physical danger. The dad is highly anxious about this unreliable, patched-up truck overheating or breaking down. Then, we move to human danger. The aunt is worried about the weirdos and homeless populations hiding out in the abandoned developments. And finally, we get to the supernatural danger. Cousin Camilla playfully jokes about a paranormal crackhead trying to grab his feet. This perfectly contrasts with the protagonist's cocky 19-year-old attitude. He totally brushes it all off. But as readers, we're unconsciously adopting all 3 of these anxieties, carrying them right along with us as he finally gets behind the wheel.
Section 3. Shifting the atmosphere.
By mapping out the evening's timeline, we can clearly see the temporal distortion experienced during the climax, which really highlights how suspense literally stretches our perception of time. Just look at the jump from 8:45 p.m. to 10:15 p.m. This is an hour and a half where the protagonist's entire world shatters. In reality, the drive shouldn't take nearly that long, but trauma and fear completely distort his experience. And then, notice the massive gap between 10:15 p.m. and 3:30 a.m. That is over 5 hours of the protagonist just driving aimlessly, way too paralyzed by fear to answer his phone or return to his family. The timeline itself is telling a story of a mind breaking down under the weight of an inexplicable event.
Section 4. Pacing the climax. What's really fascinating here is the author's use of onomatopoeia to mimic a heartbeat, methodically slowing down the pacing to signal the shift into the supernatural. When you read, "track the bumper, track the hood," your internal reading speed automatically aligns with the rhythmic, rattling sounds of the failing truck. And then it drops to a simple tock, tock. The author is forcibly slowing down your mental processing speed right at the exact moment the character's reality begins to freeze. It's an absolutely brilliant storytelling technique that perfectly aligns the reader's physical experience of reading with the character's sensory experience of freezing in terror.
Then we hit this number, 57. The speedometer getting stuck at exactly 57 kilometers per hour acts as a physical anchor for the lucid, dreamlike sleep paralysis he suddenly falls into. Right in the middle of this unfathomable supernatural event where the surroundings appear to be stretching and twisting, he desperately stares at that number, 57. He slams his foot on the gas, trying to escape, but the number refuses to change. It literally mocks him. By fixing on this one stubborn, unchanging piece of everyday technology, the author highlights the sheer helplessness of the situation. The rules of physics have just been paused.
And instead of relying on generic, spooky visuals, like a pale ghost or a shadowy demon, the author deconstructs the monster using highly specific, grotesque physiological details that evoke a deeply visceral reaction. I mean, look at these descriptors: a dog-like hairy neck, coagulated liquid, 4 tragically dislocated arms just hanging limp. This isn't some majestic predator. It's something broken, wrong, and deeply disturbing. But perhaps the most terrifying detail is that last one. A total lack of sound. No growls, no roars, no cinematic noise at all. Just a heavy, quiet existence. This silence forces the reader's imagination to do all the heavy lifting, which, as we know, is always more effective than over-describing a threat. By framing the encounter through the relatable, physiological terror of sleep paralysis, the narrative makes the supernatural threat feel claustrophobically real. We've all felt that at some point, right? That horrible, heavy sensation where your brain is screaming at your body to move, but your limbs just flat out refuse to obey. The author maps this universally understood physical glitch directly onto a paranormal encounter. It totally bypasses the logical question of are monsters real, and instead asks, hey, remember how terrifying it feels when you can't even move your own body? It roots the supernatural directly in human biology.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, the lingering aftermath.
The sudden release of the entity is perfectly mirrored by a violent release of physical tension, demonstrating how a truly great story impacts the body just as much as the mind. The spell breaks instantly. The truck surges to 80 kilometers per hour, crashes into a bus stop, and the protagonist bails out. And then he flees and vomits. The author doesn't just have him say, "Phew, wow, that was scary." He has a violent somatic rejection of the trauma. The acidity of his stomach, the sulfuric smell lingering under his skin, it proves that true fear isn't just a mental exercise, it is a grueling, exhausting physical ordeal.
And then there are the missed calls. Those 15 missed calls from his dad represent the tether to normalcy that the protagonist is now way too traumatized and paralyzed by fear to answer. Think about it. A few hours ago, a text from his dad was just a minor annoyance to a cocky teenager. Now, those 15 glowing notifications sitting on his phone are a lifeline to a world he feels he no longer belongs to. He's absolutely terrified that if he answers, if he speaks the reality of what just happened out loud, it'll somehow invite the monster right back into his life.
What's brilliant here is that the author refuses to wrap things up with a neat little bow. Allowing his family to believe he was just drunk is a tragic defense mechanism against acknowledging the physical evidence left in the truck. When he finally stumbles home at 3:30 a.m., his family yells at him for drinking and driving. And you know what? He just takes it. He lets them believe the absolute worst about his character because the alternative is so much worse. If he's just a dumb, drunk kid, well, the world still makes sense. But if he explains the mud, the wilderness, and that sulfuric smell left in the back seat by an invisible passenger, he has to admit that the world is inherently unsafe and filled with faceless demons.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final thought on storytelling. Sometimes the horrors we can't fully see but know for a fact are sitting right behind us are the ones that truly follow us home. The monster on the road was terrifying, yes, absolutely. But it was out in front of him. When that thing crawled into the back seat, hiding among the fishing nets in the shadows, just breathing silently, that is where the real psychological torture began. The threat of the unknown breathing down your neck while you are trapped in a moving metal box is the absolute pinnacle of suspense storytelling. So, what do you think? How would you have reacted in that driver's seat? Thank you so much for joining me to unpack the mechanics of this deeply unsettling narrative. Keep analyzing the craft, keep reading, and maybe, just maybe, double-check your back seat before your next nighttime drive.